I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is being presented by Jason Harris, who's the CTO at ROK Technologies. And today we're going to talk about how to make cloud collaboration your new reality. The first thing I'm going to do is go through a little bit of housekeeping so that anybody who might be having trouble hearing through their laptop has the phone number and the access code available to them so that they can be fully functional in today's webinar. My name is Anne-Marie Houlihan and I do the marketing for ROK Tech. So we're really glad that you're here and hope that you're going to learn a lot in today's presentation. Please note that we will be recording this presentation and I will send that out to everybody who registered for the webinar. And sometimes we make these available also on the ROK Tech website. So on their resource page, go ahead and look for that if you're ever want somebody else to maybe hear this presentation if you think it would be helpful to them. At this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jason and introduce you to him and let him take you through the rest of the content.
All right. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Hopefully everybody can hear me. All right. So, Anne-Marie, you can hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you great.
All right. So, real quick, we'll just run through the agenda. Couple things we'll just talk about real briefly. Real quick, I'll tell you about who we are, who is ROK, the fear of the unknown, which is kind of referring to the cloud. We'll talk about that big question, should you virtualize? Then we can talk a little bit about the hardware virtualization benefits, the software virtualization benefits, and then we'll dig in a little bit deeper and we'll start talking about the different cloud providers and what you should consider when choosing these different cloud providers. Number 8, what can you start doing today? If you've not already made that move to the cloud, what can you start doing right now? And then we'll review some key takeaways, and then we've got a little offer from ROK to talk about maybe giving you guys a personal assessment of kind of how to get started. So anyway, let's get on. We'll start. So who is ROK Tech? We are a Esri business partner located in Charleston, South Carolina. We've been business partners with Esri since 1997. We are also a Microsoft partner and very soon to be a Citrix partner. In 2010, we vastly expanded our cloud offerings, which I'll talk a little bit about that. And combined, we've got, actually, it's got to be more than 50 by now. I've been doing this for so long. But we've got, technically, let's just say 50 years combined GIS experience. So what do? We started off as custom application developers for basically the entire, Esri product line. We've focused primarily on the internet technology applications. We are also a ArcGIS server application service provider. We are an ArcGIS Online specialty partner, and we provide software virtualization services. We provide infrastructure to other business partners, other Esri business partners and end users alike. And we also have a pretty large managed services wing. So that means we can help other people maintain their servers, like ArcGIS Server or SQL Server or SD, those kind of things. So a little bit about me, the nerd here. I graduated from State University of New York at Albany in 1994, and I actually got a degree in geography. Not many of us have a degree in, or not many of us are working in that field that we got a degree in. I'm lucky to be one of those. And I've been involved in internet mapping with Esri's product line really since the late 90s. What am I doing right now? I am now the technical architect or the CTO for ROK Technologies. So I do lots of hands-on architecting systems and things like that. I'm also an ArcGIS server addict. I've been working with it since its very first alpha release, and I've been version 9 I think was it was the first one, and we've been me and the whole team have been working with it ever since. I'm also a Android guy. I'm one of those Android nerds, so I really like playing with you know, the open source stuff with Android. In my little spare time, I am a very avid gardener, and I like to go follow the fish band around whenever I can. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of fish before, but they're a big favorite of mine. All right, so let's dig in a little bit. So, you know, when we talk about virtualization partners and cloud collaboration, these things mean lots of things to, you know, everybody. Means many things to different people. So we could be talking about stuff like software virtualization, like, you know, using VMware, or we could be talking about the various hypervisors that are available out there. But really, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to talk to you guys specifically about the different cloud-based offerings that are out there. Meaning these are companies that can virtualize your infrastructure and even more specifically your hardware. And there's actually some that can now virtualize your desktop software too. So if you can imagine, let's say, launching ArcMap and using it on a MacBook, or creating a really complex 3D scene in ArcGIS Pro, maybe on a Chromebook. All of this you can do from the comfort of your home now. We don't have to be at work on that high-end workstation anymore. That's what virtualized software is. And really the power of the cloud, you can do all of this stuff right now. So let's just jump in and take a look. What should we be looking for when we're looking for a virtualization partner and we want to enable that true cloud-based collaboration? Well, we should probably talk about the elephant in the room, and that is really the fear of the cloud, the fear of the unknown, which is really, to many, that's what the cloud is. It's a really big unknown. People, you know, first and foremost, are worried about that control that they've always had. Actually, rather, you can say they're worried about the lack of control when it comes to the cloud. You know, where is my data? Who can see my data? Who has access to my data? And really, that's a big issue for many people. Are you just going to blindly hand over control of your, you know, your hardware and your mission critical data and applications to an unknown entity? If something goes wrong, can I just call 1-800 Amazon and they're going to fix it for me? So as a GIS or IT person, am I going to be able to maintain that level of control that I've always been accustomed to when I had those servers, you know, sitting down the hallway from me? Am I really going to, you know, do I have that same level of control? Am I really going to be able to manage this full server stack in the cloud? And these are really all pretty valid questions that you should be asking yourself. So as we dig in deeper, we go over some of these slides, just kind of keep these guys in mind, keep these questions in mind. So decision time, should I virtualize? So should you virtualize in the first place? I guess let's just be frank. GIS is now, it's everywhere. A lot of people, most people in fact, don't realize it, but they work with and they view spatial data every single day. I know that when I start my day, I open up, I'm getting ready to drive to work. First thing I do is open up Google Maps or Waze on my phone to find the best route to work. That's GIS. If I'm driving out of town, I need a cup of coffee to keep me going. All I do is ask my phone where the nearest Starbucks is. Of course, we all know that's GIS, that's spatial data. So we got realtors, everyday citizens on, you know, looking up on a county's website, looking for their flood zone information. We all know that's GIS. People depend on these data sets and applications every day. As a GIS person, you know, we've become stewards of these systems, and we know all too well that the requirements to run these really complex systems just continue to get more and more complex every single day. So GIS really has transitioned from making maps to now providing valuable decision-making data and, you know, mission-critical applications. So basically, as your GIS grows, so do its requirements. You remember when we, you know, just needed to open up ArcMap or or write a script in Python, or gosh, maybe even an AML or some Avenue. That is just not the case anymore. Now we're all expected, as GIS professionals, we're expected to manage these really complex IT systems. Now you're expected to be a web server administrator. You need to be an ArcGIS server administrator. You have to be an ArcGIS Online expert. You need to be a database administrator. You need to manage all the hardware. And in the end, you still need to provide your users with a first-class experience. So you can see it's become more and more difficult to keep up with these types of requirements. So ask yourself, should I go out and hire a new system admin and buy a a brand new huge rack of servers for my server room? And in this day and age of the cloud, think about, does that approach really make sense? But make no mistake, there's hurdles that we're all going to face, and they're all surmountable though, especially now that we can virtualize our hardware in the cloud. So the big question is, yes, there's lots of use cases and there's lots of specific requirements, but really in the end, the answer to that question, should you virtualize, generally speaking, is going to be a big yes. And as I want to interject real quick, as we go through, I go through these slides, I may plow through a bunch of them, I may throw technical information, or I may not get technical enough. I would definitely encourage you guys to ask the questions in the little sidebar there. Type in a question and we'll definitely answer them at the end of the presentation, and if I don't have enough time, I'll get back to you personally. I love talking about this stuff, so please ask questions, okay? All right, so what are hardware virtualization benefits? What are the benefits of being able to virtualize your hardware? I sort of suspect that if you've gotten to this point and you're attending this webinar, you probably have a good idea of what these benefits are of virtualizing your hardware. But what I'm going to do, I'll just go through these real quickly, and I want to make sure that everyone that's on the webinars is up to speed. Really, the big one are the financial benefits. Your ability to pay as you go, right? So there is really no need for that big upfront capital expenditure that is probably going to get outdated in a year, right? If you need new hardware and you need more resources, you can just pay, month to month, and in many cases you can pay hour by hour for this hardware, and you only have to pay for what you're using, as opposed to in the old days you'd have to go buy a bunch of new servers, cost you 25 grand, and they may sit in the server room unused most of the time. Now we can just spin up new resources as we need them. Okay. Another big one is really the wide variety of hardware that is available out there. In a general sense, the cloud does provide us a very wide variety of different hardware. We can have, super ultra fast, high-end CPUs to solid state-based storage and access to just gigantic, huge amounts of memory, of RAM. And you can also do everything in between. You can have, really inexpensive low-end servers. But let's just say, let's look at it this way. Say, for example, we're all, or probably all familiar with ArcMap and the geoprocessing tasks. Some of these guys, we've got these gigantic models that need to run every night or run during the day, and they take, gosh, some of these things can take hours and hours and hours to run, right? But what if you had access to a super fast, or almost like a supercomputer? That task could run in just, mere minutes on that cloud-based platform. When it's done, we just turn that server off. We don't need to pay for it when we're not using it. So imagine your choice there. You can run your task for 5 minutes in the cloud for a couple of bucks, or you're going to tie up your local servers, your network, and your workstations for an entire day, running it locally. That, to me, that sounds like a pretty easy choice. I'm obviously going to spend a couple of bucks and run that big process on the cloud. So your ability to quickly scale up in the cloud is really one of the most compelling reasons to utilize a cloud-based infrastructure. Let me give you a really good example. Like I said earlier, ROK hosts a lot of ArcGIS server map services and applications for a lot of the coastal counties in Florida, right? So during hurricane season, these map services and applications that deal specifically with hurricane evacuation information, these things can see spikes. This is especially when there's a a hurricane brewing in the Gulf or off the coast, right? Sometimes these apps will see 100 times or greater what their normal traffic is. One server just can't handle it. There's just no way. So during these periods of huge demand, we're able to quickly scale up the resources to basically effectively meet that demand. And then as the threat passes, the hurricane goes out to sea or dissipates, we can quickly scale those resources back down. Now think about what you would do for an alternative in the traditional sense, in the normal paradigm of having these servers down the hall. What would you do? Would you have a second or a third or a fourth very, very expensive set of physical servers that sit idle the majority of the year, only to be brought online for that week where the hurricane is in the Gulf? That really doesn't make sense to have those servers sitting there idle for the the vast majority of the year. But think about it this way. On the other hand, what if you didn't even have the budget for those second or third servers in the first place, right? So when this hurricane is out there and your users needed that hurricane evacuation information the most, and if you couldn't afford that second server, your single server is going to become overloaded, it's going to crash, and become essentially rendered useless. Obviously, hopefully you can see the benefits of being able to use that scalable cloud infrastructure. That should be crystal clear in that kind of a use case. Another really great benefit is of a cloud-based infrastructure. To me, when I look at it, it's quickly and effectively manage all of those assets, that cloud-based infrastructure. You can very quickly deploy new servers. You can clone your existing servers. Let's say, for example, ArcGIS 10.5 comes out, ArcGIS Server 10.5. You can clone your existing ArcGIS 10.4 machine and then use that clone to upgrade to 10.5, do all your testing, and if it all works, you bring that one live and you take your old one down. No more upgrading or installing in place and having to worry about taking all the other people down and maybe that upgrade not going well. This is some of the great tool sets that are available. You can also monitor all the bandwidth coming in and out. You can monitor storage use, and essentially you can view and manage all the aspects of that infrastructure from a really super easy to use web portal. And for me as a system administrator and a user alike, that to me is just amazing. That's one of my favorites. So software virtualization, this is a somewhat sort of lesser known aspect of the cloud and how people use hardware and software in the cloud. Software virtualization has been around really for a long time, but the issue was that it was often only deployed within large organizations. So in the pre-cloud days, these large organizations were really the only entities that were capable of a large-scale virtualized desktop or virtualized application providing that, because the hardware that you need to power these things is pretty large. You need some juice behind you. You need a lot of servers to run this stuff. But think about with the emergence of the cloud, we're not limited to just these large-scale organizations. It's just not the case anymore. We have access to that high-end hardware. Everyday people and organizations, big and small, can now provision and deploy this really powerful high-end hardware in really just a few minutes. But what is software virtualization? I mean, really, what is that? In short, think of it this way: it's the ability to launch a desktop class application, something like ArcMap or ArcCatalog or ArcGIS Pro, and have that application work on any remote client, like a PC or a Mac or basically like a tablet, and it behaves just as it would as a native desktop application, except that all the processing takes place on the cloud, where all those CPUs and the kind of supercomputer class hardware is available to us. So ask yourself, why, what's the point of virtualizing your software anyway? Why would you want to do that? There's really tons of reasons why it makes sense, but we're probably not going to have time to hit them all, but I'll give you some key points. Have you ever had to upgrade to the latest patch of ArcGIS, or upgrade a new version on a dozen or more workstations? You probably have at some point or another, and I feel your pain. Well, sorry, I used to feel your pain. I don't feel it anymore, because in a virtualized environment, that update to the application is located in one single centralized location. That application gets patched or updated in that one single place, and then every user of that application has the updated application. So no more kind of wondering if everybody's on the same version or has the latest SQL native client, that type of thing. They are. It's one spot. Probably the big one to me is the ability to use your applications from anywhere. So let's say you've got your ArcGIS desktops virtualized on the cloud, and one day the kids are sick and you have to stay at home, but you've also got to finish up a giant project for a presentation in ArcMap. Not a problem. As long as you have that internet connection, you can launch and use your copy, your license of ArcMap, basically from anywhere, from home, on the road, in the office, all on any device. A tablet, a PC, a Mac, even a Chromebook. All while maintaining that centralized data store. Whether it be in SQL or Oracle or some file geodatabases. Your data is always going to be there, and you can get to it from any basically dumb terminal. Whether it be, could be a 10-year-old laptop. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't even think about trying to launch ArcMap on a 10-year-old laptop. Doesn't matter, because all of that high-end processing is now taking place on the server, and the results are just streamed down to the dumb client or the 10-year-old, laptop. Another great example, we see this a lot, is when we virtualize GIS applications and geodatabases. We do it for offices like engineering companies or county governments that have, satellite offices in multiple different locations, but they still have that need to collaborate against a centralized geodatabase, right? If you think about it, it's an ideal kind of solution for that. So how does this all work? In a general sense, we are really taking advantage of the huge amount of computing resources that the cloud offers us. Why would we, if you think about it, why should we continue to purchase and continually upgrade individual workstations to run our desktop apps when we can have them run on a cloud server where the CPUs and the memory and the disk are plentiful? So let's take advantage of those things and run those compute and memory hungry applications like ArcMap, run those on the server and then just display it to the client. It really does make sense. And it turns out it makes economic sense too. 10 high-end workstations, and this is going to become even more so with the rise of ArcGIS Pro and its 3D rendering capabilities, right? Think of 10 high-end workstations, and then if we add on some of the graphics cards and the capabilities that Pro is going to require, those are going to be a whole heck of a lot more expensive than a cloud-based server, right? 10 high-end workstations versus a cloud-based server. You can see that the economics are going to fall in favor of a cloud-based solution. And it really makes sense to virtualize your desktop with even 1 or 2 users now. You don't have to deploy this to a giant farm. It makes sense to just virtualize 1 or 2 people now. But let's say you start getting 3 and 4 and you want to add more. Well, we're on the cloud, so we can just scale up to accommodate that new load, right? We're not going to get into a lot of the depth on software virtualization here. We've done a couple of webinars on this subject already. If you like, drop us an email and we'd be more than happy to share them with you. It's really some good stuff. Okay, so now we're going to get down to business. How are we going to choose from all these different cloud providers that are out there? Let's start. I'm going to start by just reviewing kind of the three generalized buckets. These are the three tiers of providers. This is very generalized. This is kind of made up by me, but this is how I look at it. First, we have the big players. These are the big boys. We have the Google, the Microsoft, and the super big boy, Amazon Web Services. These guys have endless amounts of compute resources. They've got data centers everywhere, and they're building more all the time, right? I'm sure we've all heard of those guys. Next, we have the mid-sized providers. These are the guys that maintain most of the benefits of the big providers, and they also tend to be a little bit pricier, not much, but a little bit. But think about the trade-off there is, generally speaking, it's going to be the level of support that you're going to be able to get. The mid-tiers are also sometimes specialized to specific industries. Then we've got, lastly, kind of the small shops. These are the mom and pop shops. A lot of times these guys will service a single client. All right, let's start with the big providers. Microsoft's Azure, Amazon's EC2, and all the other companion offerings that Amazon has. And then also the latest in the game right now of the big boys is the Google Cloud Platform. Generally speaking, these three, as well as other large-scale providers that you'll find, there are quite a few out there, they're going to maintain a pretty comparable offering across the board. They all, try and do differentiate themselves, to some degree, but generally speaking, they're all going to give you just about the same stuff, right? So what are the big benefits? You basically have access to world-class hardware at the press of a button and the swipe of your credit card, of course. You can chain together hundreds of servers with the compute power of basically a supercomputer that can crunch through, some of the most data-intensive tasks. When you're done, you just turn it off and you only have to pay for what you used. It's really just as easy as that. Just as you can start with 100 servers, you can also start with just one server and scale up as your demand increases. The ability for these top-tier providers to quickly, and what I call hyperscale, is really unparalleled. It's truly amazing. If you need to add a new server to that cluster, you just click a button. Need a dozen more of those identical servers, just click a button. It's really that easy. And if your organization, if you have the need for this type of deployment, the big boys, this is going to be your best bet. No getting around it. One of the things that I love about having a lot of these big players in the space is the competition that it's generated. This competition between them just continues to drive prices down. What they've all done is basically essentially commoditized hardware. It's just like hardware has really become a commodity. Unlike most services, pricing on hardware has actually been decreasing instead of increasing. So what would have cost you $1,000 last year, that same compute power would now cost you something like $600. It's really been great for companies like ourselves and users alike. But here's the thing: what are some of the downsides of using one of these, large-scale providers? Well, these guys have one thing, and this is kind of nitpicky, I'll be honest. These guys have predefined machine types, right? True, there's a very wide variety of the different machine types, but still you may have to make some adjustments on what exactly you need to deploy, Some of these, machine images or these server types are, 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM, and you can't adjust it. That's what you're going to get, right? I couldn't say, hey, I need 4 cores, but I also need 32 gigs of RAM, right? A lot of these bigger ones don't have that ability. However, the exception is now Google, the Google Cloud Platform, who will allow you to specify exactly what you want, meaning 4 cores and 32 gigs of RAM, or 8 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. You can size and spec out that machine exactly as you would like to see it. I should also, I'll mention a couple of other differentiating factors. Microsoft, the Microsoft Azure platform, has kind of baked in several cloud-based services into their core operating system, like Windows Server 2012 and upcoming 2016. They give you the ability to back up that machine directly to, Azure, or you can run a SQL Server directly out of Azure. But I will say Amazon really has been in the cloud game the longest. That they essentially invented the space. So therefore, when I look at their stack of cloud services, they are, I think, the most mature. And they've got lots of other storage services and database services and things like that. It's very, very robust. All of those guys, all the big players, have really made strides to make deploying these virtual servers and services as easy as possible. However, there still are some technical intricacies that maybe the normal user may find difficult when getting started. And getting started and maintaining the system, and that really kind of leads into the big issue, and that is support. These providers usually, have very extensive help systems online to help you figure out how to manage the firewall ports and mount the different disk volumes, cloning the machines, and snapshotting, and online upgrades, and allocating all the new hardware resources. But that's it. That's a lot of stuff. At that point, you're going to have lots of online help, but after that, you're pretty much on your own. You're going to be responsible for getting that machine up. You're going to be responsible for maintaining it. You're going to be responsible for keeping that hardware stack up, all the networking, and making sure that all your applications are running optimally, and all the management tasks associated with that are taken care of. So just as it's like having a server down the hall, the same thing is true in the cloud. You still have to maintain those servers. All right. Next, I'm going to talk real briefly about the smaller shops. Like I said, I like to call these guys the mom and pop. Most often, these types of providers are only going to service, a couple of clients, and that makes up, the large bulk of their business. So why would you want to go with one of these types of providers? Well, potentially, you could get some really amazing customer service. If you have the need for, all hands on deck kind of approach, going with one of these guys might be a really good choice. The difference is you're really going to pay for it. They're not going to be able to come close to the large scale players in terms of pricing on hardware. You can also assume that you're not going to have too many options about hardware sizing, if you have any at all. Basically, you're going to get a more of a one-size-fits-all approach and little or no ability to scale, short of them having to go and order a new server from Dell to get delivered, right? Because of this, you're also not going to have that neat option to kind of pay as you go, and you're likely going to be locked into a longer-term type of contract. Now, I'm not discounting using these providers altogether. There are some, good business cases for using these guys, especially when a very strong hands-on approach is needed. So now we're going to move on to the mid-sized cloud providers. And this will be the last of the provider types that I brought up in the beginning. These are the mid-sized. So for us GIS folks, I find these providers to be in the sweet spot. So full disclosure, ROK is one of them, and that's how I have all this experience talking about it. That's because we are one of them. But don't want to influence you in any way or the other. There are other providers out there that you can choose from. So just know that. I mean, we're the best, of course, but I should at least mention that there are others. So the mid-sized players maintain their own cloud hardware, but we deploy it in a cloud-based model. Basically what we do is we take a very large pool of managed resources and we architect our own cloud. So why does that make sense? Well, first, the pricing is going to be often very competitive with the big providers. Again, this is where that economies of scale have really kicked in. Hardware, like I said before, has really just become a commodity. And while there's going to be some pricing differences, generally speaking, these guys are going to be very competitive, right? So another really big benefit here is that the mid-sized guys are, I don't know a good way to say this, but we're boutique enough to offer that specialized customer service. They're not so massive that we're going to necessitate a call center in India, right? I'm kidding, of course, but especially when you're focused on a very particular industry like GIS, right? They've got the experienced staff on hand to help you through the issues that will most certainly arise when you're trying to maintain an ArcGIS server, or you're optimizing a geodatabase, or you're making sure that the right SQL Server port is opened, right? They're going to be on hand and available to help. And honestly, this is really like the differentiating factor, and it's their ability to support your servers and applications when you need it the most. And a lot of times we sort of refer to this as a managed services type of offering. Basically what you can do is you can let someone else manage your servers for you. You can bring your own ArcGIS server license, or you can use ROK's application service provider license to host your services without having to deal with the licensing, right? All of this while maintaining the benefits of that cloud-based infrastructure. They still have that core ability to scale up very rapidly like the big players. So, maintaining something like an enterprise level, ArcGIS server and, the web tier and a SQL Server cluster is really no easy task, to be honest. I'm sure we've all run into that. Keeping it running at optimal speeds is even tougher. So a managed services approach lets you focus on your core work and not have to worry about maintaining the server stack and all those kind of crazy quirks that go with it. All right, so I talked about the good. Let's talk about maybe the bad about a mid-tier provider. I don't necessarily think they're bad, but there's some things to think about. If you have, some extreme hardware requirements, like launching hundreds of servers for a specific task, or what I call hyperscaling from, say, one server instance to 100 within a click of a button, the mid-tier players are really not going to maintain, generally speaking, not maintain that capability for that type of scaling approach. Another one that may play a role, the mid-size guys are not a pure pay-as-you-go model, right? With the big players, you have that ability to just pay for minutes or hours of server time. The mid-size providers are usually going to need something, like a month-long type of commitment. So we can't turn them on, turn them off, turn them on, turn them off, that kind of thing. So those were the main categories of the different cloud virtualization providers. Now I'm going to just briefly rope back and we'll talk a little bit about software virtualization. I know we touched on this earlier, but let me just repeat a couple of these items. It's pretty important. In short, again, software virtualization pushes the workload of the resource-hungry desktop applications that we all use, right? These requirements, they grow, each and every month and every release, it seems like. We push those resources to the cloud, where those resources like the CPUs and the fast disks and the RAM are all available, and we can quickly scale. Basically, all that processing is now done in the cloud, and the results are streamed to the client. I will be 100% truthful when I tell you that if I need to open up ArcMap, or if I open up my Arc catalog, I strongly prefer to use my virtualized version over a local version that's installed on my laptop. It launches faster, and the performance is just way more than I'm ever going to be able to get off my laptop. And that's really one of the key takeaways. I do not have to worry about what kind of client or PC or Mac or whatever that my users are using. I can use my 6-year-old laptop and run ArcMap off Starbucks Wi-Fi, and it still is going to perform like a beast. So what do you need to look for when you're looking at a software virtualization provider? And I'll be honest with you, this is where it can get a little bit tougher. Currently, the only one of the big players that offers such a thing is Amazon, and this is with, it's called their Workspaces offering, right? Again, if you have the internal resources and the know-how to get all of this, all the pieces put together and connected to your back-end infrastructure, like an Esri License Manager and your SQL Server and your ArcGIS server, Amazon Workspaces is really a good, viable option to look at. While not quite there yet, there have been some pretty, let's just say, pretty strong indications that Microsoft will be rolling out their own kind of similar offering soon. We also have other providers out there, again, shameless plug, ROK Technologies, that we specialize in these types of things. A key differentiation factor here is that we're, like I said before, kind of a boutique industry. We've always been focused on GIS, and we know the workflows that GIS users need. So when you consider that core GIS experience that we have and our extensive knowledge with IT, this type of solution becomes very compelling. So, you know, if you will, again, forgive my shameless plug here. I try to be very objective, but I got to slip in a plug every once in a while. I'll just tell you real quick about our Instant Enterprise offering. In short, it basically marries software virtualization, you know, with a powerful GIS-focused back-end infrastructure of enterprise-level geodatabase servers and a fully managed ArcGIS server. So basically, you get the apps that you need to use to get your work done, and ROK manages all the heavy lifting on the back end with our hosted SQL server and our hosted ArcGIS server. It's pretty cool stuff. And all of that equals huge cost savings. All right. So now we've got to consider, we've talked about a lot of the providers, we've talked about what they can offer, the different size providers. We know that there's a lot out there, and obviously there's tons that I didn't even mention. But there are a ton of them out there that can really effectively virtualize your hardware, and there are some also that can help you virtualize your software. So how do you choose? How do you make this really big decision? It all comes down to your organization's needs. What does your organization need to accomplish, and what resources do you have available? If you must have that ability to what I called hyperscale, or if you need, you know, a massive amount of computing power, one of the big providers is going to be the best way for you to go. If you have some heavy but, you know, somewhat infrequent workloads, such as those long geoprocessing tasks that I spoke of earlier, the big players that offer that pay-as-you-go model is going to be very, very compelling. Spin that server up for a couple hours, run your geoprocessing tasks, and turn it off when you're done. And you're only going to incur charges when that server was active. Let me just mention, if you do that option, don't forget to shut that instance or that server down, or at the end of the month, you're going to get a rather large and unexpected bill, right? That's happened to some clients of mine. Let's also not forget that with the big players, you still have to have that IT staff and that time available to them to manage everything. It's not some magic thing in the cloud that's going to self-manage itself. It's still a server. It still needs to be maintained, and it still needs to be optimized. All those traditional things of management are still present. And this really is something that very frequently gets overlooked. I've seen more than my share of customers dive in, head first with that, the ArcGIS server, Amazon machine image, that cloud instance that Esri has available. I've seen clients go head first, launch this thing and try to manage it, thinking it's cloud, it's going to be super easy, and only to come and abandon the thing a few months later because they just weren't able to properly manage it. These are still very complex applications, just as they would be on your local network, and they need the same care and attention in a virtualized cloud environment too. So what about choosing a small shop for your virtualization needs? Well, I'll be honest with you, it can be tough to make a good case for this scenario. But if you need to get all of your servers off-premise and you need someone to manage every little aspect, then potentially their strong customer service support could be a compelling reason. Most of the mid-sized providers can also offer this level of service too. So, and without all the worries about kind of what could happen in a smaller shop, the smaller shops will not often have that hardware and infrastructure, redundancies in place, like backup power and biometric safety controls to ensure that your servers are always backed up and protected. So if you go with a small provider, proceed with a little bit of caution. And that again leads us to the mid-sized providers, which again I feel is really the sweet spot for many folks, that are using GIS applications out there. To recap, their prices are often going to be competitive with the bigger players, but at the same time they're going to offer an extra level of support should you need it. And this is especially true in the niche industries such as GIS. That support will go a long way to get you up and running successfully. That support can extend into managed services, where the staff can manage some or all aspects of your server stack, like taking care of the firewall or run your database backups or tune your map services to make sure they're performing optimally. And again, some of these smaller or the mid-tier providers can virtualize your desktop software, which really is a fast-growing piece of the cloud. If you think about it, all of these positives will save you money on both hardware and support. But let me be completely honest, let me be completely transparent and clear. All of those good things does not mean that you don't have to go out and do your research, right? Make sure you know about the facilities of where you're going to host your cloud-based infrastructure. Make sure you know about their facilities, where they're located, what types of security they have in place. And lastly, let me just mention that if you need a mass compute power or super granular type of billing, you're going to be best served with one of the big players like Amazon. So what can you be doing right now if you haven't already gone to start with your virtualization? What can you do right now to prepare for this kind of big transition? Well, I can't stress enough that you have to understand your organization's needs. Start asking questions internally. Will a move to the cloud alleviate my pain points? What level of service do I require? Do I have that? Can I really manage? Do I have that staff to maintain and optimize, a full cloud-based server stack? Can I really do that? The next thing, so I guess that's the first thing, know your needs, know what you need to look for, kind of assess your current situation. Next, other thing you can do like right now to start is get out there and sign up for these free trials. All of the players that we've talked about will let you try their services out for free in some capacity. All the big players will let you spin up what they call micro instances, which are pretty low spec machines, but they'll let you launch them up for free for a period of time. These are great to get your feet wet and test the cloud waters, so to speak. It's basically a full featured virtual machine in the cloud. Now, it's not going to be a real, big beefy machine, but you can certainly get your feet wet. And when it's time to go big, you'll be ready. You'll already have the ins and outs down. The mid-size shops often have, similar types of programs, and I'll speak specifically to how ROK handles this, how we do it. We really encourage people to test out our services before you buy them. We want you to know the level of service that you're going to be getting when you choose us. We've dedicated some very high-end hardware to our hosted offerings, and we're always up for kind of showing off that hardware a little bit. So if you're ever looking to see what your performance or your workflows might look like in the cloud, cloud-based environment, give us a shout. We can set up a hosted map service for free. Check it out. If you're ever interested to know how Virtualize software works, just launch ArcMap or just about really any other desktop application. I know I've been speaking about GIS applications a lot, but it's really true with any desktop class application. You want to see if it's really that good, if I'm telling you guys the truth, just ask, and I will, or someone here will get you an account and you can try it out for yourself. And lastly, this is one that we've kind of been brushing aside for a while, but we should really touch on the importance of getting used to ArcGIS Pro now. We all know it is the future of the Esri desktop platform. As time goes on, much like we had that ArcView to ArcMap transition many years ago, ArcGIS Pro will become the de facto application for desktop GIS. So why am I mentioning this? And I talk about virtualization providers and cloud collaboration. I'll tell you why. It's because ArcGIS Pro was designed in such a way that it practically begs to be virtualized. If you've ever used ArcGIS Pro, you know that this thing is a CPU and memory loving beast. It requires very high-end hardware, and again, also a new piece of hardware that we're not necessarily used to, and that's a very powerful and expensive graphics card. So when it comes time to start purchasing those $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 workstations that you're going to need to meet the requirements of ArcGIS Pro, you might want to consider using the cloud, where the CPUs and the graphics cards are plenty. As a side note, if anybody is going to the user conference in San Diego, I'll be giving a talk about specifically virtualizing ArcGIS Pro. You might want to check that out if you're feeling especially nerdy like me. All right, the key takeaways. Let me just real quickly go over these. Really, we should accept what is the new reality. GIS has become more and more focused on IT in general. Its requirements, both on hardware and management skills, continue to grow with each year. Virtualizing and taking advantage of the cloud resources, it just makes sense these days. Next, get out there, try the different providers, see which ones can work for you. Don't just go head first, start spinning up a bunch of servers. Make sure you understand what your organization's needs are before jumping in heads first. But by all means, get your feet wet. Try all those different free services that are out there. And lastly, start thinking about your budget. Do you think are you going to be upgrading your server soon? Do you think if you upgrade it today, do you think if that compute power is going to be enough for you in 5 years when you can do a hardware refresh? Do you think you're going to be able to keep up with that demand? Or maybe that huge capital purchase up front might sit idle until that demand catches up. These are all economic issues that we're all going to need to think about and budget for in the coming months and years. So think about that kind of stuff. And lastly, we have this little special offer that I usually like to let Anne-Marie talk about a little bit. I'll briefly.
I can do that if you'd like.
Oh, I'll briefly run down this. I'm feeling a little spicy today. So if you've ever wondered, if you're a good candidate for virtualization, we have an email address up there, info@roktech.net, and there's just a couple of questions. Feel free to drop us an email and, and answer some of these questions. Have you moved your infrastructure to the cloud? Have you virtualized any of your ArcGIS desktops to the cloud? Why or why not? What potential hurdles, after maybe seeing this presentation, this webinar, have you envisioned facing? And then quick question about virtualizing ArcGIS desktop. It's good to know what version you have and if you've got concurrent use licensing, and also your email or phone number, and we can sort of give you a quick assessment. And I will be completely truthful and completely unbiased. I know I kind of plugged ROK a little bit in there, but it's just as many times as I plug ROK, I have pointed people to use something like Amazon. So I really will give you the straight answers. I also love to talk about this stuff. I don't know if that shines through in my presentation or not, but I've been doing this stuff forever, feels like, and I really do enjoy it. So if you've got any kind of crazy questions, there's my email at the bottom. Fire off, ask questions, or if you have any questions right now, punch it in the chat box and ask away.
Here, I'll read this one to you. When do you really need to start looking into ArcGIS Server when all you want to do is use your data on ArcGIS Online, especially when you can't load more than 1,000 features on ArcGIS Online at a go and the Analysis tab is not on it?
Okay, so let me say this nicely. ArcGIS Online is a wonderful tool. It's awesome. You can do some incredible things. You can share some data and make these maps, and it's great. Now, at the same time, it can't do everything. You're going to reach limitations at some point. Now, does that limitation that you're running into, is that going to offset the cost of ArcGIS Server and running a complete ArcGIS Server stack? That's something you have to weigh. You got to kind of weigh the costs and benefits there. But like I said, ArcGIS Online is not going to do everything that you want it to do. So one of your options in that type of case might be doing something like a hosted ArcGIS Server solution, which is something that ROK does. Instead of you or your organization having to purchase a $20,000 license of ArcGIS Server or whatever it is, and that $20,000 worth of hardware or whatever you need, we can host ArcGIS Server map services that expose the full level of functionality of what that ArcGIS Server can do, without you guys having to pay the licensing or deal with the hardware or deal with the the software or the software licensing. So that's a lot of times, a lot of people that we run into will have used ArcGIS Online and have run into basically some kind of issue where they just can't quite get it to do what they want to do, and that's when someone like us can step in and help them out with some ArcGIS Server stuff. That's a good question. Thank you very much for that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're just a little bit after the 2 o'clock, and I guess just as a takeaway at the end, when Jason and I really thought about webinar material to share with you guys, it was really along the lines of, if only I had a magic, like a crystal ball, and I could see how technology is going to change in the future, and I could make decisions today that will prepare me for that instead of having to be reactive. And so that's where the idea for this webinar came about, is that we do think that we can see a little bit into the future with the new release from Esri, and we can imagine what's available and how that will continue to scale up. So you can really start thinking now about whether you invest in servers, whether you invest in partnership, whether you invest in staff. and what's going to work well for your organization. So I hope you got a lot out of today's presentation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll go ahead and send the recording to everybody who registered. And you have Jason's email right there at the bottom. Any questions that you have directly, you can reach out to him. And I really do hope you take advantage of the offer and just answer those couple of questions and send them over to us, and we'll get you a customized assessment. So that's about everything. Jason, you have anything else?
No, I just reiterate, use my email address. I love talking nerd shop with people. So definitely reach out if you have any questions at all. I love to talk about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And thanks for...
He's telling the truth. That's true.
No joke. Thanks for coming and attending the webinar.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.